Oh, well, hello there, and welcome to Frank Reads. I'm Frank Hasenmuller. I've been reading some of my favorite stories lately, and I thought I'd share them with you. I enjoy them, and I hope you will too. If you've seen my Beauty and the Beast videos, you will know that I actually enjoy fairy tales quite a bit, and I actually enjoy them a little more now, as an adult, than I did as a child. I think it's because my analytical thinking is a little stronger now than it was when I was, 5. And the next story I'm going to read is a fairy tale. It also comes from France, like Beauty and the Beast, but it's about roughly 75 years older. It was written by Charles Perrault in 1697. And he was the first to write it down, but more likely than not, it had actually existed for centuries and had just been passed down orally. It's interesting, and I deliberately chose it because I've long considered it an interesting companion piece to Beauty and the Beast, a counterpoint. And maybe you'll see why. It's one of my favorites, and it is called Bluebeard. Once upon a time, there was a man who had fine town and country houses, gold and silver plates, embroidered furniture, and gilded coaches. Unfortunately, however, this man had a blue beard, which made him look so ugly and terrible that there was not a woman or girl who did not run away from him. Now, one of his neighbors, a lady of quality, had 2 daughters who were perfectly beautiful, and he proposed to marry one of them, leaving the choice up to the mother which of the 2 she would give him. Yet neither one would have him, and they kept sending him back and forth between them, not being able to make up their minds to marry a man who had a blue beard. What increased their distaste for him was that he had already had several wives, and nobody knew what had become of them. In order to cultivate their acquaintance, Bluebeard took the sisters, their mother, 3 or 4 of their most intimate friends, and some young people who resided in the neighborhood to one of his country estates, where they spent an entire week. Their heads were filled with nothing but excursions, hunting and fishing, parties, balls, entertainments, and feasts. Nobody went to bed. The whole night was spent in merry games and gambles. In short, all went off so well that the youngest daughter began to find that the beard of the master of the house was not as blue as it used to be, and he was a very worthy man. Immediately upon their return to town, the marriage took place. At the end of a month, Bluebeard told his wife that he was obliged to take a journey concerning a matter of great consequence, and it would occupy him at least 6 weeks. He asked her to amuse herself as best she could during his absence, and to invite her closest friends, to take them into the country with her if she pleased, and to offer them fine meals. "Here are the keys to 2 of my great storerooms," he said to her. "These are the keys to the chests in which are kept the gold and silver plates that are only used on special occasions. These are the keys to the strong boxes in which I keep my money. These open the caskets that contain my jewels, and this is the pass key to all the apartments. As for this small key, it is for the little room at the end of the long corridor on the ground floor. Open everything, and go everywhere except into that little room, which I forbid you to enter. My orders are to be strictly obeyed, and if you should dare to open the door, my anger will exceed anything you have ever experienced." She promised to carry out all his instructions exactly as he had ordered. And after he embraced her, he got into his coach and set out on his journey. The neighbors and friends of the young bride did not wait for her invitation, so eager were they to see all the treasures contained in the mansion. They had not ventured to enter it while the husband was at home, because they had been frightened of his blue beard. Now they began running through all the rooms, closets, and wardrobes, each apartment exceeding the other in beauty and richness. Then they ascended to the storerooms, where they could not admire enough the number and elegance of the tapestries, the beds, the sofas, the cabinets, the stands, the tables, and the mirrors, in which they could see themselves from head to foot. Some mirrors had frames of glass, and some of gilt metal, some more beautiful and magnificent than had ever been seen. They could not desist from extolling and envying the good fortunes of their friend, who in the meanwhile was not in the least entertained by the sight of all these treasures, because of her impatience to open the little room on the ground floor. Her curiosity increased to such a degree that, without reflecting how rude it was to leave her company, she ran down a back staircase in such haste that she nearly broke her neck 2 or 3 times. Once at the door of the room, she paused for a moment, recalling her husband's prohibition, and thinking that some misfortune might strike her for her disobedience. But the temptation was so strong that she could not withstand it. Therefore, she took the small key and, with a trembling hand, she opened the door of the little room. At first, she could discern nothing, the windows being closed. But after a short time, she began to perceive that the floor was all covered with clotted blood that reflected the dead bodies of several women suspended from the walls. These were all the wives of Bluebeard, who had cut their throats one after the other. She thought she would die from the fright, and the key to the room, which she had taken from the lock, fell from her hand. After recovering her senses a little, she picked up the key, locked the door again, and went up to her chamber to compose herself. Yet she was unsuccessful because she was too upset. Then she noticed that the key to the room was stained with blood. She wiped it 2 or 3 times, but the blood would not come off. In vain she washed it, and even scrubbed it with sand and grit, but the blood remained, for the key was enchanted, and there was no way of cleaning it completely. When the blood was washed off one side, it came back on the other. That very evening, Bluebeard returned from his journey and said that he had received letters on the road informing him that the business on which he had set forth had been settled to his advantage. His wife did all she could to persuade him that she was delighted by his speedy return. The next morning, he asked her to return his keys. She gave them to him, but her hand trembled so much that he did not have any difficulty in guessing what had occurred. "Why is it," he asked, "that the key to the little room is not with the others?" "I must have left it upstairs on my table," she replied. "Bring it to me without fail and right now," said Bluebeard. After several excuses, she was compelled to produce the key. Once Bluebeard examined it, he said to his wife, "Why is there some blood on this key?" "I don't know," answered the poor woman, paler than death. "You don't know?" Bluebeard responded. "I know well enough. You wanted to enter the room. Well, madame, you shall enter it, and you shall take your place among the ladies you saw there." She flung herself at her husband's feet, weeping and begging his pardon, with all the signs of true repentance for having disobeyed him. Her beauty and affliction might have melted a rock. "You must die, madame," he said, "and immediately." "If I must die," she replied, looking at him with eyes bathed in tears, "give me a little time to say my prayers." "I shall give you 1/4 of an hour," Bluebeard answered, "but not a minute more." As soon as he had left her, she called her sister and said to her, "Sister Anne," for that was her name, "go up, I beg you, to the top of the tower and see if my brothers are coming. They promised me that they would come to see me today. If you see them, give them a signal to make haste." Sister Anne mounted to the top of the tower, and the poor distressed creature called to her every now and then, "Anne, Sister Anne, do you see anything coming?" And Sister Anne answered her, "I see nothing but the sun making dust and the grass growing green." In the meantime, Bluebeard held a cutlass in his hand and called out to his wife with all his might, "Come down quickly, or I'll come up there." "Please, 1 minute more," replied his wife, who immediately repeated in a low voice, "Anne, Sister Anne, do you see anything coming?" And Sister Anne replied, "I see nothing but the sun making dust and the grass growing green." "Come down quickly," roared Bluebeard, "or I shall come up there." "I'm coming," answered his wife, and then she called, "Anne, Sister Anne, do you see anything coming?" "I see," said Sister Anne, "a great cloud of dust moving this way. Is it my brothers?" "Alas, no, sister. I see a flock of sheep." "Do you refuse to come down?" shouted Bluebeard. "1 minute more," his wife replied, and then she cried, "Anne, Sister Anne, do you see anything coming?" "I see 2 horsemen coming this way," she responded, "but they're still at a great distance." And a moment afterwards she exclaimed, "Heaven be praised, they're my brothers. I'm signaling them as best I can to hurry up." Bluebeard began to roar so loudly that the whole house shook. So his poor wife descended to him and threw herself at his feet, all disheveled and in tears. "It's no use," said Bluebeard. "You must die." Then he seized her by the hair with one hand and raised his cutlass with the other. He was about to cut off her head when the poor woman turned toward him, and fixing her dying gaze upon him, she implored him to allow her one short moment to collect herself. "No, no," he said, "commend yourself as best you can to heaven," and lifting his arm. At this moment, there was such a loud knocking at the gate that Bluebeard stopped short. The gate was opened, and 2 horsemen were seen entering right away. With drawn swords, they ran straight at Bluebeard, who recognized them as the brothers of his wife. One a dragoon, the other a musketeer. Consequently, he fled immediately and hoped to escape, but they pursued him so quickly that they overtook him before he could reach the step of his door, where they passed their swords through his body and left him dead on the spot. The poor woman was nearly as dead as her husband, and did not have the strength to rise and embrace her brothers. It was found that Bluebeard had no heirs, and so his widow inherited all his wealth. She employed part of it to arrange a marriage between her sister Anne and a young gentleman who had loved her a long time. Another part became the captain's commissions for her 2 brothers. The rest she used for her marriage to a very worthy man, who made her forget the miserable time she had spent with Bluebeard. Moral: curiosity, in spite of its appeal, may often cost a horrendous deal. 1,000 new cases arise each day. With due respect, oh ladies, the thrill is slight. As soon as you quench it, it goes away. In truth, the price one pays is never right. Another moral: provided one has common sense and learn to grasp complex texts, the story bears evidence of taking place in the past tense. No longer are husbands terrible to see. No longer do they demand the untarnished key. Though he may be jealous and dissatisfied, a husband tries to do as he's obliged. And whatever color his beard may be, it's difficult to know who the master may be. Well, there you go. There's Bluebeard, which is one of the most violent and horrific fairy tales ever written, easily. And I'm not going to lie, it's one of the reasons I like it so much, because I really do enjoy the horror genre. And Bluebeard is very much as much of a horror story as a fairy story. And is a good example of what filmmaker Guillermo del Toro talks about when he talks about how fairy tales are the direct ancestors of modern horror movies. And it very much is. And it's also kind of interesting too, because again, like I mentioned in my Beauty and the Beast videos, it reflects the society in which Charles Perrault was living, because it really seems like the moral is that wives shouldn't be too curious, when you would think the moral should be that maybe husbands shouldn't be so homicidal. But these things change and societies change, but the stories are still interesting to revisit and enjoy. And I hope you did enjoy it. I know I did. And I hope you will join me next time. And until then, keep reading.